Florida, but there aren't any others. What is a site draft? It's a three-party instrument where this party here, Jeffries Brothers and Son agents, are telling another party, Gilmartin and Company in Savannah, to pay the third party, which is John Hedges, agent. I'll say more about this one later, but because this was made at sight, it was subject to a 2-cent bank check tax, and here's the 2-cent stamp with a beautiful cancel. I showed the cancel over here. Office General Freight and Ticket Agent, Florida Railroad Company. Oh, by the way, I have always little maps with a little dot to show you where in Florida the particular place is. So here's Fernandina up way in the northeast corner. So now, it's another take-home message. These are all the places that I've seen a revenue stamp document from Florida from. Now, to people who are familiar with postal history, it might not seem like too many, because I believe there's probably like 100 or more origins for covers. But this 23 here is amazingly a large number, because there's only about 55 recorded usages for all of Florida. So the fact that there was 23 different is just enjoyable and amazing. And the second big take home is, look, where's all the rest of the state? There weren't any people there. Well, let's just say there aren't any documents that have survived from there, but most of what's missing here was uninhabited, and it's where, as you know, most of the people that live in Florida today are now. All the origins are rare. Here's a table where I've listed how many are recorded from each of these different origins, and 15 of them, of the 23, are represented by only 1 or 2 examples. Even the most common is actually rare, only 8, Tallahassee. Here's something to emphasize, that all the origins that I've recorded are above the dotted line here, except for Key West down at the extreme southern end. Now here's the boring introduction. The stamp taxes were coming from the U.S. government's wartime Internal Revenue bill, where they taxed many, many different things, but including documentary stamp taxes that were so extensive that basically every piece of paper that changed hands needed a stamp. And they kept it all the way, on a broad scale, all the way for 10 years till October 1st, 1872, when all the taxes were rescinded except a 2-cent levy on bank checks. And they divided the whole country into collection districts, which are basically identical to the congressional districts. Florida had just one collection district with an assessor and a collector and their various deputies. And something else we're going to see is that in the South, if you made a wartime document that was still in effect after the war, the U.S. government required you to pay your taxes retroactively, because after all, there had never been any such thing as the Confederate States of America. There were just 11 rebellious states of the Union. And I'm going to show 3 of those here. And then to emphasize again, in 40 years of looking, I've only seen 5 Florida documents with adhesive revenues. How to arrange them? If you arrange them by the document type and the tax rate, you'll get this list. And there's really nothing special here. Most of these are common kind of documents, bank checks, receipts. The ones I put in bold are kind of interesting, a stock certificate, some entry of goods that could only happen at customs houses. What about looking by stamp? It's also kind of boring that there's mostly common stamps, 20 or 30 are the most common 2-cent stamps. There is a postage 5-cent stamp used, But this is not really a very illuminating or eye-opening way of looking at this. The best way is by origin, because what's important about these is not that it's a bank check or a receipt, it's that it's from Florida. The Florida origins and the attendant backstories are light years more significant than the taxes paid. So that's how I arrange them and how I've arranged them in my exhibit. Now, if we're going to look by origin, how will we arrange these? The first time I did an exhibit, I did it alphabetically and got slapped down. So I decided, let's put some geography into it, and I'm going to show them by region. The first region is the Atlantic coast, from Fernandina down to Palatka. Then the Gulf Coast, from Gulf Hammock up to Pensacola and Barrancas. Then the northern Panhandle, and then finally looping around to the north central region. So I'll have little maps up in the corners to show you where these places are. Oh, and finally, I should say, the last region is Key West. So let's begin. The Atlantic coast from Fernandina, Mayport, Jacksonville, St. Augustine down to Palatka, which is not really on the coast, but the Fernandina document that I showed earlier is basically dripping with history. But we say that stamps whisper, covers speak, documents scream. Lots of detail. What was happening is that the Florida, here's Fernandina, the Florida Railroad, which is mentioned in the council, and the payee here is John Hedges, assistant treasurer of the Florida Railroad. The Florida Railroad was the first railroad of the state, and it ran from Fernandina down to Cedar Key, diagonally across the state. And the other party here, the steamer dictator, the agents were Gilmartin and Company. Gilmartin and Company were cotton factors up in Savannah. And so what's happening, the agent of the Florida Railroad, I'm sorry, is telling Gilmartin to pay, pay the $205 to the treasurer of the Florida Railroad. Now the next place is Mayport, which has long since been absorbed by Jacksonville. This is another one very cool because again, it's a site draft in order to pay with a 2-cent bank check stamp. But what's it about? It's from the St. John's Bar pilots. An extra R there, but a pilot is someone that was employed to take the ship in and out of the port because they knew all the sandbars and the channels so that the ship wouldn't run aground. And here's the charge for pilotage to the schooner Sylvan. Pilotage in, 7 foot, where they just spelled it phonetically, and out. But 7 feet is the draft of the vessel. It's how deep it was sitting in the water. And coming out, when it evidently loaded down with its cargo, it was sitting 4 feet deeper, and so they charge you more because they charge $2.50 per foot, because it's more dangerous taking it out when it's heavily loaded. So that's just some beautiful detail there. Now to Jacksonville. These are 2 site drafts, Jacksonville 1867 and 1869, and they're also made by captains of the schooner Frank Palmer and the schooner Mary Fletcher, drawn on parties in the east. I'm going to go fast here because there's about 30. St. Augustine, very cool because these are checks made by Abijah Gilbert, who later became a senator. Before he moved to Tallahassee, the capital, he was at St. Augustine. And here's a archetypical carpetbagger. He not only brought his goods in his carpet bag, he brought his checks with him. And he crossed out to New York and rode in St. Augustine before he made out the checks. And these are the only recorded stamped documents from St. Augustine. Palatka, which is on the St. Johns River, This is a promissory note. So it's 5 cents for every $100, $750, that's $800 units, times 5 cents is 40 cents. And it's paid with these beautiful, what we call ultramarine stamps. This is a shade that the printer, on his own accord, started using because they were worried that people were washing the cancels off the dark blue stamps. But more interesting is Hubbard L. Hart was the proprietor of the most prominent steamboat line in Florida, the Hart Line. And he was prominent in promoting tourism, the first tourism in Florida. And here's an example of how the tourists got to see Florida. They jumped on board these steamships, and along the way you might shoot an alligator or two from on board. And here's another picture of really how close it was, how narrow a passage it was. In fact, it might get a little too close to comfort on the Ocala. Look out there. Now let's go to the Gulf Coast, from Gulf Hammock, St. Mark's, up to Pensacola and Barrancas. Here's a mortgage on a plantation near Gulf Hammock, and also to a lot and store at Cenote, which is otherwise known as Cedar Key, and that's here. And the mortgage tax was 50 cents for every $500. So here you have this array of stamps, including a $5 stamp. These are $1.50 here. The largest tax and highest denomination stamp on any Florida document, and it's also the only one referencing these two places. And Cedar Key was the terminus of the aforementioned Florida Railroad that went from Fernandina down to Cedar Key. Was a great improvement because that way they didn't have to sail all the way around the whole peninsula and back up. This is a picture of Cedar Key, and here you can see the terminus of the railroad. And this is pre-tidal wave. In 1884, a tidal wave washed all of this away, the whole town, everything. And they reestablished it, and they also renamed it Cedar Key, but it was a whole different place. This whole island was abandoned. Okay, St. Mark's, about halfway up the coast. This one's great because it's got the 2-cent sight draft overpaid by a 5-cent Jefferson postage stamp. It's the sole recorded document from St. Mark's. Here's a receipt from Pensacola, up in the corner here, which is also extraordinary because it's not only does it have a hand stamp cancel, which you normally don't see on these Florida documents, but it actually names, it's the only one that's got the place name, Pensacola, Florida. And also the only document from Pensacola. If anyone can find any more of these, please let me know. But these are my statistics, and I have a census that's appended at the end. Barrancas was this nearby Fort Barrancas. This is an express receipt, which also took a 2-cent tax. And Adams Express Company is almost certainly the one that provided the stamp here. It's from a soldier. You see, it's a package going to Limerick, Maine. And it's from a soldier that was evidently, it says from Edwin R. Munson, 2nd Maine. And he must have been stationed at Fort Barrancas. So this is the earliest use of a revenue stamp in Florida. It's May 1865, not too long after Appomattox. This is too early for stamps to have gotten in by the normal channels. It almost certainly was supplied by Adams Express Company to their office there. Okay, now let's go to the northern Panhandle. I'm going to start from west to east. A promissory note from Marianna. This is one of the first ones that's stamped retroactively. You see, it's made in February 1st, 1864. And there were no stamps in Florida. That was held by the Confederates in 1864, this area. But because the note had not been paid, after the war, they had to put the stamps on. 5 cents for every $100, 20 cents tax. And it's one of only two recorded from Marianna. Calhoun County. A lot of times they don't mention the place because it was just out in the country. This one, so it says up here, just the only place name is Calhoun County. It's interesting because they put 2 1-cent proprietary stamps on. It's almost like a token payment because those were supposed to be used on proprietary medicines, and they were probably actually taken off of a medicine packet. And later someone put on a 25-cent stamp, but even that wasn't enough because the tax was 50 cents for a general power of attorney. So let's go on because I only have half an hour here. So Quincy, 5 documents I've seen from Quincy. This is also stamped retroactively. You see it's made January 1st, 1861. 1 day after date. That didn't mean pay it in 1 day, it just means open-ended. And what's interesting is you see a lot of these January 1st promissory notes. What happened was merchants were assuming the function of banks and making loans to people. So this was basically like a long-term loan and 8% interest to date. And what's interesting about this, a couple things. One is, because this was January 1861, not just before the stamp tax, before the war. It didn't need to have a stamp, but they didn't have a knowledge of the fine points of the tax law, and they stamped it anyway with the correct 15 cents tax. And the other interesting backstory here is that one of these proprietors, Gunn, W.J. Gunn, was actually the commander of the first military encounter of the Civil War in Florida, which I was surprised to see happen 3 months before Fort Sumter. They were already aggressively seizing the federal arsenal at Apalachicola, 5,000 pounds of gunpowder and 170,000 cartridges for the Confederate stockpile. Now here's another Quincy document with another great wartime story. Jonathan G. See, here's another one, January 1st. And they were loaning money at 8%. Well, Jonathan G., during the war, had been the commandant of a Confederate POW camp at Salisbury, North Carolina. And you come to find that a larger percentage of prisoners died there from starvation and disease than at Andersonville. And like the Anderson commandant, Henry Wurz, Major G was charged with war crimes by the federal government after the war. But unlike Wurz, who you probably know was executed for his role at Andersonville, G was acquitted after a 4-month trial and returned to Quincy to a hero's welcome. And I have a little footnote here that as far as the treatment of the prisoners, a lot of the responsibility lay with Edmund Stanton because he had made the decision he didn't want to exchange the Union prisoners who were not able to fight again because of the conditions in the Confederate camps with able-bodied Confederate freed prisoners who were in better condition because they were kept in the Union camps. So that's, you could write volumes about that. Here's one from Gadsden County. So interesting because it's a labor contract with a freed slave, Millie, with a lot of very harsh conditions. She labored for nothing but room and board, just the necessities of life for her two sons and 2 daughters. I agreed to feed, clothe, and furnish medical attention to Millie and her 4 children. I do not promise to pay them anything at the end of the year. And I had the right and authority to discharge and drive them from the place. It's interesting that this was made January 1866, January 15. This is early days for these kind of contracts because the freedmen were still hoping for 40 acres and a mule at this time. And a lot of them didn't want to go back to work. And finally, January 1st came and went, 1866, and people had to start going back to work just to survive. Here's another Gadsden County document, what I call a wallpaper franking. The $1 tax for this deed was paid with 24 stamps, from 2 cents all the way up to the highest one is 15 cents. The revenue stamps were in very short supply because the people that sold them got a very small commission, usually only 1 or 2%, never more than 5%. They didn't want to invest much money in maintaining a stock of stamps. And that's the reason you have this kinds of, all throughout the South, you see this kind of wallpaper franking or stampings. Now Tallahassee, here's 2 side drafts. One is made by a cotton factor who's put this design. A cotton factor is the person that oversees all the arrangement. He supplied the seed and the supplies to the planters. You make sure they have a market. He'll find somebody in the east that wants to buy the cotton. That's oops, I forgot an I here. But anyway, that's what a cotton factor was. You see, this is drawn actually on party up in Philadelphia, probably where there was textile mills or cotton buyer. And here's another one from Tallahassee from our old friend Abijah Gilbert, who was now a senator in Tallahassee and still using his old New York checks in 1873 in Tallahassee. Whoops. The only stock certificate I've ever seen from Florida, from the Pensacola and Georgia Railroad Company. Interesting that it was printed locally. It's got a semi-weekly Floridian steam power press print. So the newspaper would make extra money doing job printing for all kinds of operations, including printing the stock certificate. Here's an insurance policy, the only insurance policy I've ever seen from Florida. That had its own tax, 25 cents, depended on the premium. And for a $30 premium, there was a 25-cent tax, and there's the 25-cent stamp. There's another kind of interesting kind of document. This is a summons. Any kind of document that originated a court proceeding was taxed, called original process tax, 50 cents, the flat 50 cents, and here's the 50-cent stamp there. Wakina. This is the last retroactively stamped document, and it also didn't need to be stamped. It's April 28, 1862. The stamp taxes didn't go into effect until October 1862, but they didn't know that. They just knew they had to put stamps on their documents, so they went ahead, in order to make it legal, in case of any court proceedings, and put the 5-cent stamp on. It's tied by this X. Sole recorded document from Wakina. Interesting that the name is the Indianization of the Spanish Wakina. Monticello. Here's the earliest document, earliest use of a revenue stamp in Florida, except for that Barrancas one that I showed you earlier, where the stamp must have come from Adams Express. And here it's October 1865, and they've started the procedure of furnishing stamps to the assessors and collectors and various merchants that wanted to stock stamps. Here's a mortgage from Live Oak with a long list of all the things that came along with the mortgage. Where's my mouse? The mortgage tax was 50 cents for every $500, so there's $2 tax. What's happening? the story. I'm going to skip the story because we're short on time. And now there's a few documents from what I'm calling the North Central region. This one is cool because it doesn't have a stamp, but I'm showing it because it's an interesting exemption from the stamp tax. Those original process documents only had to be stamped if they were from a so-called court of record. If it was from a justice's court, it didn't need a stamp. So this one was from a justice of the peace court at a place called Governor's Hill, and it didn't need a stamp. And it's full of lots of interesting misspellings, and of course Fayetteville and Governor's Hill have long since disappeared. The only time I've seen what we call a second issue revenue stamp in Florida, that's these blue and black, the 2-cent stamp there. Here's another document that's from the cotton factors, Gilmartin and Company up in Savannah. There's a lot of documents from all the places that they were overseeing, supplying them with cotton. Most of them are in Georgia, but here, this one was the only one I've seen that was from Florida, Micanopy. Here's the Gilmartin hand stamp in the center. I seem to have lost my mouse, but the only document I've seen from Ocala, interesting because it's got a bank check imperforate stamp way after these stamps were normally being used. This stamp was probably taken off another document and stuck on here, but I like it because it's the only recorded use of an imperforate stamp in Florida. And finally, Key West. These are entry of goods documents from the customs house at Key West, and these are showing the three rates, 25, 50 cents and $1, depending on the value of the goods being imported. And this is a little just showing that in some cases the duty on the import duty could be more than the value of the goods, and in general it was pretty high. For example, what I said was the leaf tobacco, I lost my mouse here, but the leaf tobacco was worth $78, and the import duty was $94. And in general, the cargo of the ship was taxed at an average of 44.5%. And these are the references for the monograph. This is my census of everything I've ever seen, all the details. And that's the end. Any questions? I lost my mouse. Oh, okay.
Hey, Michael, can you hear me? This is Tom Lira.
Hi, Tom.
Hey, all of the information that you presented is on the Florida Postal History website. Your
Great.
exhibit and monograph.
Great.
I have a question, Michael.
Okay.
You showed lots of adhesive revenues. Is there any revenue stamp paper that you collect from Florida?
Bill Castenholz has 2 or 3 in his field guides to revenue stamp paper, the southern section, the volume that's just about the south. And they're mostly toward the end of the 1870s and early 1880s. There was nothing, from the period of broad stamp taxes up to 1872.
At that time, are they fairly scarce also?
Yes. Yeah. Almost impossible to find.
Okay.
Who's in charge now?
Any other questions? Well, let's talking for a moment. Anybody else have a question for Michael?
Vern, do you want to announce what you announced at our meeting earlier for Mike?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm being heard right now.
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Okay. So Michael has given us two excellent presentations. And I don't think I'm on camera now.
No.
But we have the President's Award for Excellence made out to Michael. And I was able to show it on the last meeting. And it'll be shipped to him sometime this week.
Thank you.
We appreciate all of your work and excellent research, and
Nice.
I thank once again Liz and the Sarasota Stamp Show and personnel for making this all possible.
Thank you all for attending. I'm sorry you can't be here in person, but hopefully we'll see you in Orlando in December. And here.
You're gonna try it? I can't get the video here.
So thank you all very much. Anything else anybody wants to say?
Thanks, Mike. Great
Thank you,
presentation.
Mike.
Very nice, thank you. Okay.
Welcome.
Bye,
And
everyone.
thanks, and thanks, Liz, for working this out for the Florida Postal History Society. We appreciate that very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.